Welcome to MapCrow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today we are talking about how to draw with colored pencils. Now, first off, I just want to clear the air. I think colored pencils get a bad reputation, and this is primarily for two reasons. One, Crayola makes some really cheap ones that you usually have to buy for art class, and they are terrible. And two, you're not using them on the right paper. If you're only using them on cruddy sketchbook paper, you're not really using the proper colored pencils. So first things first, use the right material. I like to use Prismacolor pencils on Strathmore Bristol board. The second thing you gotta know is that when you're working with colored pencils or watercolor, you really want to work from high value to low value colors. You want to start with colors that are close to white and then build up your values by getting darker and darker as you go. And you want to render the whole thing to a certain level of finish and then go back over it and then go back over it. I say this because it's so easy to get hyper-focused on one little part of it, and then when that finished little perfect part is tied into the rest of the whole, it might be the wrong size, it might mess up the values, it might cause problems down the line, so you want to kind of use all of your yellows and then use all of your oranges and reds and so on. That's how I like to do it. The third thing to keep in mind is to let your highlights and midtones kind of be your warmer colors, and then cool off your shadows and the darker areas with dark purples and dark blues. That will help to simulate a natural lighting circumstance like what you would see outside on a sunny day. The yellow sun gives us these very bright, warm highlights, and then the shadows are going to be getting reflected light from all of that blue sky that surrounds it. That's why our eyes are naturally going to accept a cooler shadow and a warmer highlight. The fourth thing that I'm going to suggest you learn how to do is to render with the contour. You can really see this very clearly in the early stages as I am just putting down very lightly some of my higher value colors. I'm not just rendering flatly, I am curving the lines to describe the contours and curves and shadows that we will see in the shape when it is finished. This really helps to kind of remind me about my light sources, but also that bit of contouring goes a long way to giving the whole image a lot more volume than it would have if you're just kind of doing a very flat unidirectional rendering pass. The next tip that I'll give is to go very lightly to protect your high value areas. You can't really get that white of the paper back once it has been covered. You'll have to come in with like whiteout or acrylic paint to bring back those very bright highlights once you've covered them up. So be careful to protect them. Just go slowly and build up coverage over time. It's okay to kind of edge in with each new color just very softly if you don't know quite what you're doing. It really helps to have a plan, a sketch, a study, or some photo reference in front of you to make sure you know what areas you're trying to protect in the first place. If you start with a heavy hand, if you press down too hard with your early colors, it's going to cause so much buildup of this colored pencil on the Bristol board that it won't really stick to it. When you try to add more on top, it'll just kind of smear and slide around without actually adding any more pigment. As long as you can see some of the white of the paper still showing through, you're probably good to go, and you want to save that full coverage colored pencil pass for the very end of the process. If you are careful and slow with building up that coverage, what you can do is actually allow these colors to mix on the page itself. So you're not exactly blending so much as you are layering, and this kind of transparency of all of these colored pencils are going to create these more complicated palettes than what you would get if you just kind of go with the colors directly out of the box with full coverage. The next thing that I'll say is a lot of colored pencils are going to be very, very saturated. The reds are going to be very reds, the purples are going to be very purple, and so on and so forth. You're not going to really get a lot of desaturated colored pencils unless you buy these enormous sets. I like to work with the 48-piece set from Prismacolor, and that gets me by, but whenever I need to desaturate colors, there's two things you can do. You can add the color complement, so if you need to desaturate some yellow, you can always add some purple to it, or by adding a nice kind of gray, rusty brown on top of things. That's going to kind of calm down the more saturated colors, and again, you can get a lot more range by layering the colored pencils in this way very softly at first. And the final thing that I will say is save black until you absolutely need it at the very, very end of the process. I like to go with a very dark purple or an indigo blue to see how deep I can get those shadows without reaching for black, because black is really going to flatten things. You want to make sure that you are only adding black when you absolutely need to make those values clear. Because if you reach for that for all of your shadows, you're really going to like obliterate the complexity of your palette and flatten the colors, and it's going to look like you weren't paying very good attention to when I was talking about color theory at the beginning of this video, and I don't think either of us could bear that. A little bit of cleanup at the end to make sure that the very bright colors are still showing through after all the mixing, and you're basically done. One of the things I love about colored pencils is how accessible they are. Even if you're buying the 48-piece set that I use from Prismacolor, it's probably more than you're used to paying for colored pencils, but it's not really going to set you back that much. And if you are mixing colors and coloring lightly, you're not really going to go through them terribly fast. I haven't bought a new box of pencils in years, and I feel like I use colored pencils more than anybody else I know. The other thing that I really like about colored pencils is you don't have to wait for drying times. It's very immediate. Yeah, it's permanent. Once you make a colored pencil mark, it's very, very difficult to erase it, and that can be a little nerve-wracking, but once you work past that, you build up some confidence, you go slowly, you really will realize that you can make some pretty sophisticated work that is colorful and appealing very, very quickly without, having to clean up anything other than pencil shavings at the very end of the process. You can get an awful lot of detail with colored pencil, but you're probably going to have to work at a slightly larger size than sort of this, small sheet of Bristol that I'm working on. I tend to work very small in these videos because I'm doing it under a time crunch, and it needs to kind of fit in my camera really easily, so I can't work very large. But if I'm doing a commercial commission or something like that with colored pencils, I'm probably going to work a little bit larger than actual size, so when I scan it in, I can reduce it down and I'm not losing any detail. Well, I think that about does it for this episode. I was getting lots of comments throughout this kind of Building Better Monsters series on, just like what exactly my process for using colored pencils is, and I hope I've answered most of the questions that you have. If you have any more questions, please let me know in the comments below. I might be back next week with another Building a Better Monster video, but I'm kind of thinking about doing a Monstober catch-up video because even though it's been 13 days, I haven't done a single one of these sketch challenges that I came up with. So I think I want to prioritize that and just get some pencil drawing done. I think that would be a really fun episode. In any case, that wraps things up. So until next time, farewell.